Have you ever felt like as you earn more money, you still feel like you're kind of struggling to make ends meet? If that's the case, you're not alone. There are a number of reasons why when you earn more money, it might not actually feel like it. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the factors that might be impacting why it feels like you never have enough money to do the things that you thought you could do when you're earning the money that you're earning now. If you're new here, what's up? My name is Lindsay. I'm a financial therapist, which means I'm a licensed social worker and I have certifications in financial therapy, and I'm here to help people understand the intersection of psychology and money. Look, if you have been earning more money over the past few years, but it still feels like you're really struggling to make ends meet, there are several really good reasons for it. Let me start off with the very first one. The first one is, of course, inflation. Inflation is something that I honestly didn't really hear people talking much about or thinking about until obviously the last couple of years with the pandemic and the huge spike in inflation rates. Inflation just means that over time, the cost to buy a certain good is going to cost more money over time, which means if you had a dollar in 1970, in today's money, that same dollar would have much less purchasing power. The sign of a healthy economy is that you have a little bit of inflation, which kind of signifies that there is some economic growth. But the problem when inflation rates go really, really high or they raise really, really quickly is that the cost of buying those goods or services also rises so quickly that your dollar loses its purchasing power really quickly. Generally, inflation happens year over year in a kind of slow but steady manner. Over the last 40-ish years here in the US, the average rate of inflation has been around 3.25%, technically 3.28. So we're used to having a little bit of an increase every single year. And most employers kind of count on it. They expect it. Many workers tend to get something called a cost of living increase, and they get anywhere between 2.5% and 4% of a increased salary. I always recommend negotiating for more because, as we've seen recently, that inflation can kind of eat away at that raise. So if you're only getting the same amount of a wage increase as inflation, you're actually not able to save any more money because inflation is eating it up. The reason that inflation feels intense right now, if you're in the United States, is that last year in 2022, the average inflation rate was 8.26%. Yeah, so kind of a marked difference from that 3.5-ish rate that I mentioned to 8%. That might be one of the main reasons why, if you've earned more money over the last couple of years, it really doesn't feel like it. The other reason why recently it might feel like the money that you've earned isn't really going as far as it used to was because of the pandemic. In the first year and a half, maybe even 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us were spending far less on discretionary expenses than we were back in 2019. We weren't going out to eat, we weren't traveling, we weren't buying new clothes. Maybe some of us spent some money kind of upgrading our home offices. And for people who were deemed essential employees, they were still going into work, but there wasn't a lot of like commerce happening, right? The coffee shop had closed down. Maybe the gym you used to go to on the way home had closed down. So there just really weren't the same types of opportunities to spend your discretionary income. Now, fast forward, we're 3+ years out from when COVID was declared a public health emergency. And people are starting to get out and do things again. They're going on vacations, they're buying clothes again, they're going out to dinner, all of these different things that maybe you weren't doing for a year and a half, 2 years, all of a sudden you're doing now. And not only are you doing them now, but you're doing them at a time of increased inflation, just like in my last point. Thankfully, at the time of this recording, the inflation this year is around 4.5-ish%, so much less than last year. Inflation in the US is finally starting to cool off. But if you started noticing this like back last summer, last fall, it makes a lot of sense why it probably felt that way. On top of that, a lot of us qualified for different financial supports. For 3 years, a lot of people who owed money on their public student loans were in public forbearance because the government said, you're at a 0% interest rate, you don't have to pay your loans right now. And a lot of us took advantage of that. So when you lose that big expense of student loans, and then it might be coming back, it also is another reason. On top of that, many of us had access to things like subsidized health insurance. Some of us were able to qualify for unemployment. For a lot of parents in the United States, they had access to childcare tax credits. So there was just a lot more money kind of coming in and nowhere really to spend it. Stagnating wages are also a reason it might not feel like the income you make is what you thought it would be like when you were making that money. What I mean by that is that when adjusted for inflation from the 1970s till now in the United States, most workers' wages have not really increased in the way that they should have. There is a huge gap here. People who are middle income earners and low income earners, they are the most likely to have seen their wages stagnate, while people who are already high earners, they have actually seen their wages shoot way, way up. It's so frustrating because productivity has gone up immensely since the 1970s, but our wages have stagnated and even dropped, especially if you're in that middle or lower income earning bracket. And there are so many amazing articles all about this, but essentially, technology was supposed to buy us back time. When different technological advances were rolling out, scholars were saying, this is going to be great. Economists were saying, this is going to be great. People are going to be able to work less. Once we have machines doing some of this heavy lifting for us, we'll need fewer people to be operating them, and people will be able to have some of their time back. The idea was that as we added in more technology from machines all the way up to where we're at now with like AI and machine learning, is that we would have to do less actual labor. And the idea that economists predicted was that working week would go down from 40 hours a week to 32 or 30 hours a week. But instead, that has not happened. Our productivity has shot up and we're still working like dogs. If it feels like you're not making a lot of money, there's a very good reason for it. Your wages, when adjusted for inflation, most likely have not gone up in the past 40 years. Another reason it might feel like your money just isn't going that far is that in the United States, we have a very gossamer thin social safety net. We have barely coverage for things when people become parents, when they are sick or injured and can't work, if they need to take care of themselves. The systems are really not in place to support us. And when I say support us, I mean all of us. I'm child-free by choice, so I can only stand in allyship with my friends and loved ones who are parents, but holy wow, there is no support for parents. Paternity leave, maternity leave are basically non-existent. On top of that, between the ages of 0 and 5, when kids can go to public kindergarten, parents are paying out of pocket for daycare, preschool, childcare. And the cost of services for things like daycare, preschool, and childcare, even if you're not at a fancy schmancy place, can be easily the cost of housing. So there are low systems in place to support parents, which is a large reason that the money that you're making might not feel like it if most of it's just going right out to care for children. Other systems of support that we really don't have, healthcare. I know you know this. I'm going to meet my healthcare deductible this year. And let me tell you, my partner and I were like, all right, we're going to get everything done this year because for the first time in our lives, we're going to meet our deductible. And it's such a backwards way to think about healthcare. We talk about like preventative care and physical wellness in this country, but we really don't do a lot to support it aside from the one primary care visit a year and the one well woman visit a year that you get if you're in this country. Then you tack on top of that, if you are a person who is non-binary or trans, rights are being stripped from you. People who have reproductive organs, they're being told they can't decide when they will or won't have children. It is a dumpster fire when it comes to the financial safety net of our actual healthcare. And healthcare is one of the leading causes of debt in the United States. In other developed countries, this is simply a mind-blowing concept. It does not exist that their citizens would be in debt in order to get care for their physical and mental health. Back in the 2007-2008 banking crisis, the World Health Organization a few years later went back and looked at a cluster of nations in Europe that have better social support and social safety nets than we have here in the United States. What the WHO was trying to ask was how much does income and depression or mental health issues impact one another? We know that there is a bi-directional relationship between depression and debt in the United States, meaning people who have depression are more likely to have debt, and people who have debt are more likely to have depression. So the World Health Organization wanted to see how having supports in place, different supports in place, impacted a person's mental health. The way that they did this was they looked at wages decreasing after the Great Recession, and they wanted to see if that person was more likely to need help for their mental health issues. What they found was that people who had strong government safety nets, meaning things like subsidized child support, cash assistance, career guidance, those types of countries actually their mental health really wasn't impacted that much. But the countries that didn't have that type of social support in place, it did impact their mental health. It's hard to kind of apply data from a different cultural, economic, and sociological perspective here on the US, but I think it's very fair to say that I imagine it's probably similar here. It is really stressful when you don't have a safety net in place and you have to be your own safety net. Having low systemic support can absolutely be a reason your money feels like it's disappearing. If you have to pay for childcare, if you have to pay to take your kiddo to the doctor, if you have to pay a lot of money when you are on paternity or maternity leave, or you don't have things like long-term disability at your job and you get injured and you're unable to work, it makes sense that your money's going right out just as fast as it came in. These two other areas are less systemic and there are things that you can actually do about. So if I piled on the doom and gloom, these areas at least are things where you can kind of take some ownership of them and see what you can do to tweak your spending so that it feels a little bit more like you have more money coming in. The first one is lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation. My last video, I talked all about lifestyle creep and lifestyle inflation, so you can check it out if you want more. In a nutshell, it's essentially that when we earn more money, we also start spending more money on discretionary expenses or on things we used to consider treats or one-off luxuries. So you might be finding that the things that used to be special for you are suddenly weekly or monthly occurrences, or you have upgraded your lifestyle with clothes, transportation, and housing, and that money is going out through these little holes called lifestyle inflation. The reason that your money might not feel like it's going as far as it is because you are not keeping your eyes on your own paper. What I mean by that is so often we compare how we're doing financially based on what we can see other people are doing. And we're comparing our success or our overall wellness based on what we see our neighbors, our friends, our family members doing. And instead of going, what actually matters for me? What are the things that matter when it comes to how I spend my money? We're going, oh, so-and-so just went to Southeast Asia. I want to go to Southeast Asia. If they can do it, I can afford to do it. Even if maybe that's not one of your values of traveling with your family in that type of way. Another way is maybe you were really committed to having one kiddo and then your friends are having multiple kiddos and you're feeling like a little bit of FOMO and a little bit left behind, and you and your partner are like, yeah, I guess we could have another kid. Even if that wasn't something that you had previously thought that you wanted, you go ahead and you do that, which is a huge expense. On average, to raise a child in the United States per child is $300,000 from the time of birth through graduating high school. And that is just essentially to raise them. That is not even about some of those other kind of unexpected expenses or unexpected costs. That certainly doesn't include the cost of higher education like college. The other thing that I see happening is like fancy new cars, fancy new clothes. It can be really tempting when you see your neighbor come home with a nice, shiny new car, and maybe you tell yourself that you can afford it too because the monthly payment is pretty low. There was recently a TikTok that went viral where a gentleman was really transparent and shared that he thought that leasing a vehicle meant lease to own, meaning he thought after 36 payments to lease a car, which is essentially to rent a car, he would own it. It was only after paying half of the term of the lease that he realized, oh my gosh, I'm actually not even going to own this vehicle when this is done. I really appreciated that person being transparent. I think it's a really humble reminder that so many of us are kind of guessing when it comes to our personal finances. And we learn plenty of things from our parents, from our friends, from our teachers, but a lot of people don't know what they're doing with their money. So if we're following what other people say we think we should be doing, but it doesn't matter to us or isn't how we want to live our lives, it can really get us into financial hot water. I'm not opposed to leasing cars, even though personally I've never leased a car. I've always bought used cars, used nice cars to be clear. I am a little fancy in that way, but leasing cars is a really good example of this rent to own or temporary owning culture that is very unique to the United States. Not only leasing cars, but things like buy now, pay later. Every time I go to buy something online, it's like, do you want to take this $100 purchase and split it up over the course of a year and only pay $8.30 a month? And for a lot of us, we are thinking in that monthly space. And so we go, I can totally afford $8 a month. Sure, sign me up. But what we don't think about is that But every single time we're doing that, we're kind of creating like a subscription model for the things that we own. All of a sudden, a new shirt that I buy, I'm basically paying it off over the course of a year. And sometimes these monthly costs trick us into spending more than we can. I see this happen all the time with mortgages. People go, oh, cool, I can afford X dollars a month. But what they don't think of is how long it's going to take them to pay it off, how much things like taxes, homeowners insurance, interest rates, how much that is going to cost them over the lifetime of breaking up that payment into small little chunks. So be really, really careful if you notice that you're the type of person who thinks in terms of monthly expenses when you are buying things, and think more in terms of the overall cost of that item. In most cases, outside of really large purchases, I'm a fan of making sure that you have enough money in your bank account to be able to pay for that item in full. Now, I use credit cards, but the way that I use my credit card is I pay it in full every month. So I'm never paying those super high interest rates or those late fees. Those interest rates are wild right now. Credit cards were never really a great deal, but like a decade ago, a credit card interest rate was like 12, 13, 14%. Still high, but now they're like 23, 24, 25% interest rates. That is a wildly high expense and fee that you are using to purchase something. So if you're finding yourself putting things on credit cards and getting comfortable having a monthly payment, that might be where your money is going. And that might be why it feels like you're not making enough. To recap, there are many reasons that it might feel like the money that you're making isn't quite enough. Some are systemic, some are individual. In my world, I believe that it's important to tackle both in a way that feels good for you. Maybe dialing down some of those monthly expenses can be a great way to feel like you're making a little bit more money, and then advocating for change on a more broad scale can also maybe financially serve you in the long run, but hopefully help to lift up our communities along the way. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any videos right here on the Mind Money Balance channel. See you in the next one.